In this episode of the Photography News podcast, Will blows bubbles, Roger falls over, and Kingsley gets upset about autofocus. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Photography News podcast. My name is Roger Payne. I'm the editorial director at Photography News, and I thought that I would introduce my two colleagues who are with me today in order of the likelihood of a courier turning up at their premises to either drop off or pick up some photographic equipment. So, without further ado, let me introduce editor of Photography News, Mr. Will Chung. Hi, Will.
Hi, Rog. Hi, Kingsley. How are we?
We are good, thank you. Now,
Yes,
you're
sorry
more
about the
likely
courier.
to have a courier turning up. Pray tell what the courier will be bringing for you.
Well, the nice people at Canon have offered me a couple of lenses to test. This is a new, well, it was new a few months ago, the 600 f11 and the 800 f11, both fixed aperture telephoto lenses. So they're meant to be here before lunchtime, but obviously this is late afternoon now, and the courier hasn't turned up. So apologies if somebody bangs on the door and rings a bell.
Right. So, have you checked local eBay listings to see if these two Canon lenses have appeared recently?
Maybe got lost in the snow.
Yeah, indeed. And alongside, well, visually alongside Will, but not actually physically alongside Will, is Kingsley Singleton, contributing editor. Hi, Kingsley.
Hi, morning, afternoon, evening. Where are we? When are we? I'm going to point out though, actually, that your billing in order of courier arrivals is actually incorrect, because I had a courier today which delivered my 85mm 1.8 Nikon Z.
So it did.
So
Ooh.
currently it's 1-0 in couriers to me. And I'd also like to point out that creaking noise is not me, it's Will's chair.
Right.
Yes, I have ordered it, but it keeps on creaking. I'm sorry about that. I'll stop rocking.
Well, it's good to have you both along, and we apologise in advance if any of our musings are interrupted by a bang on the door, but I guess we'll probably be able to edit those out anyway. So while we can chat, why don't we dive straight in and see what you guys have been photographing lately? It's a couple of weeks. We've had another fall of snow in the time while we've in between us recording. So Kingsley, I take it based on the last podcast, you won't have gone anywhere near the snow.
Not until other people were driven away.
Yes.
And we've had more snow, and actually I haven't been out again either. It's quite bad, really. I think it might be a reflection of my mood. But in the 2 weeks that have lapsed, I did. In fact, on the day that we made the last podcast, I received my Nikon Z7 II, and so in the intervening sort of couple of weeks, I've been feeling my way into that with a sort of a variety of things, none of which included snow.
Now, this is your first foray into mirrorless camera ownership, is it not?
Yeah, and although I've spent some time with those or not this camera, but I spent some time with the predecessors and sort of got used to it. But it is, in fact, one of the things when I was talking about getting it, one of the things that Will said to me was like, oh, you have to, don't get rid of all your DSLR stuff straight away. Just see if you feel your way into it. And like I hasn't been quite that sort of seismic. But because I actually haven't been out. I mean, I've done some dog photography with it, which is one of my things, but I haven't really been out to do any landscape photography, which is the other tent pole over which I spread myself. So yeah, I mean, the kind of I wouldn't say the jury's out. I think it's great. But there are certain differences and certain handling differences between it and the D850, which I had before as well.
So in terms of specifically what are the handling differences? What are you noticing?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons I went for it, one of the reasons I like it is because it feels like a Nikon. It's got like a big, really comfortable hand grip, and one of the things that I think you'll find most people say about these cameras is that they are probably amongst the best kind of handling mirrorless cameras. But it is missing a few knobs and dials, which the D850 had. So stuff like there's the D850's got like a drive setting dial, which you can set manually, but this doesn't. So it's sort of getting around little things like that and mapping those features to function buttons, and then kind of, it's not relearning, it's just like a slight reorientation, I suppose.
And then once you've mapped features to particular function buttons, then remembering the function button no longer does what it says on the back of the camera.
Exactly.
Which was always the problem that I seem to get into. Well, it's nice to hear that you've got your new camera. And I'm sure we will look forward to hearing more about how you get on with it in the ensuing weeks and months.
Mm-hmm.
So what about you, Will?
Well, to be honest, going outside, it's been fine. I've been taking the camera with me, but I haven't found the conditions conducive to taking pictures because it's been dull and wet. So even when it snowed, it wasn't that great the other day. There were a few flakes. It wasn't much compared with the first batch of snow we had. So going outside, I haven't taken many pictures, but I've done a few more things indoors. So I went back to a project I was working on last lockdown, or actually during the summer lockdown, when I was doing a few self-portraits. So I did something last night, actually, not very successfully, so I need to rework it a little bit. And can I just say, I was using my Z7 for that. And one thing I found on the Z7, which is very annoying, is the fact that every time you turn the camera off, the self-timer cancels itself. I mean, Kingsley mentioned on his 850, and I've got an 852, when you set the self-timer, it's set, it's physically set. But on the Z7, you set it, and I was doing 9 frames at a time, and I had to turn the camera off just to save battery while I fiddle around, etc. And I turned it back on. Of course, I pushed the button thinking the self-timer was still there, but it wasn't. So I hope Nikon give us a choice of letting me keep the self-timer or not, as the case may be, rather than just taking it away from me when it goes off. So apart from the self-portrait, I've been doing some bubbles, which has been fun and challenging. I'm still working on it, but it's rather fun, getting some glycerin from the local supermarket and mixing up some solution and blowing bubbles and taking pictures of them. It's rather therapeutic and fun.
So which aisle of the local supermarket do you pick up glycerin from?
A lot of the food, my local Morrison's, and I can't speak for every supermarket in the land, it was in the cake decoration aisle with the food colorings and stuff like that. Same little bowls. It was £1 a bottle. So I must admit, I bought about 5 bottles and used 3 of them already. So,
are you on some sort of watch list now?
I know, it's glycerin. And I've made a straw as well, because what you have to do is blow the bubble up on a white dish, and then get the light softbox as close as you can to the bubble, because obviously what's reflected is what's photographed. And so I found with the light turned down close to the bubble, I couldn't get my head underneath it with a short straw. So I've got 2 metal straws, and I joined them together so there's a long straw, so I can actually blow the bubble up from underneath this light tint.
So not only do you have to operate a camera, you have to inflate a bubble at the same time.
It's fun. Everyone is different. Every shot you do is unique, I have to say. But like every snowflake, it's all unique.
What's the reason for the light tent? Is that just kind of purely to get the softest kind of illumination possible, or does it have...
Well, the thing is, if you blow a bubble and just photograph it without any light on it, it's clear, basically. So what you have to do is have a softbox which covers as large areas as you possibly can, and that lights up all the colors. And of course, what's in the bubble is photographed. There's also the reflections around it. So, for instance, you see your lens if you get very close, and you can see where the gaps in the light is around you. So that's why you get this thing as low as you can. But the derivation of the bubble is using this gadget, which is basically a filter frame, a rattan filter frame I had from years ago. And I've wrapped some string around it, some nylon cord actually. And so what I do with this is I soak this in a bubble solution, and I hold it up with a stand, and the bubble film is then across this aperture, which I know on the podcast it's difficult to explain, but I'm showing you guys here. But the bubble film is in this frame, and then you photograph this frame with all the bubble solution running around and making wonderful colors.
Oh, I see.
So that's a challenge at the moment. But when you get closer with the macro lens, and I'm sure you've both done macro, but there's so little depth of field. Even at f22, the depth of field is millimeters. So it's a real challenge.
So are you using the kind of the focus stacking feature on the camera to kind of like make up for that, or are you?
No, you can't, because it's constantly moving.
Oh, I see, right.
And the thing is, it's such beautiful patterns. It's like I don't know, like watching the great red spot zooming around Jupiter. You get all these wonderful patterns, and then what you do is you blow the bubble up and you let it settle for a little bit. Then all these colours start forming, and then what you then do is get your straw again, the one you blew your bubble up with, and blow very gently at the bubble without obviously bursting it. And you get these lovely swirling patterns, which is hence my reference to the great red spot on Jupiter. And so every shot is different. Every shot is not very good, and you get an awful lot of failures. So I've probably done about 1,000 pictures on my Z7 so far.
And how many shots are you happy with, Will, out of 1,000?
Well, to be fair, Rog, I haven't had time to upload them all and have a good look, but I'm sure I'll get something out of them.
Right.
But there's something, I want something which I can make a big print of and stick on the wall. Right. So I'll keep you up to date, and all the listeners too, about my progress.
Fantastic. Well, I've not been I've not been doing anything quite so bold as blowing bubbles and shopping in Morrison's to get glycerin. And actually, I feel that I've had some photographic karma on me these last few days, because on 2 occasions I've missed some fantastic photo opportunities. One was purely because I wasn't looking out the window one night, and there was a really, really clear night. And if you listen to previous podcasts, I did say that I was wanting to do some more night and low light photography this year as a project, and I missed a fantastic starry night where I could have gone out and had another go at some star trails. So that was the first downer. And then the second downer is that I forgot to, whenever I go out walking the dog in the mornings, I take my trusty X100S with me, but then realised I'd forgotten to recharge the battery. So because I didn't have a spare battery charged either, I left the camera at home. And of course, a couple of 100 yards out of my house, I literally walked around a corner to see this beautiful herd of deer, literally sort of probably about 20 feet in front of me. Now, the fixed lens on the X100S probably wouldn't have got that close, but it was a missed opportunity until they spotted me and the dog and obviously cleared off. And almost to kind of prove the error of my ways, yesterday when the snow had arrived, I took the camera out and in a Kingsley style fell over and I right onto my hip, which is now swollen quite excessively, and I'm in quite a lot of discomfort just sitting around.
I'm kind of like I'm alarmed by this lack of battery charging thing, because although I'm pretty sure that a previous Will's word of wisdom was about buying a spare battery, but clearly he omitted to dispense the advice that one should keep one's spare battery charged.
Well, the interesting thing is, you can be the judge of whether this is interesting or not, but I do have 2 batteries for my Fujifilm X100S, and one of them, you can literally put it in the camera, take it out in cold weather, and it will work for about 5 pictures, and then it's done. Whereas the other battery that I've got in the camera now is going for days and days and days. So either there's a fault with my spare battery, or I think there is this thing, isn't there, where you can, just because you can constantly top up the juice on a battery, it actually reduces its effectiveness. And if you go out, like I say, particularly in cold weather, it just kills it. Is that something that you chaps have experienced before?
I think, Rog, the battery memory thing used to refer to NiCad batteries, nickel cadmium batteries, but
right.
I don't think it applies to nickel hydride. I might be lithium hydride. Might be wrong.
So I've got a Duff camera battery.
I think you've got a Duff battery.
So
maybe
it's
just age thing, maybe.
What, the age of me?
There is also you might be able to apply this to the Fuji, I don't know, but I had a similar problem with my vacuum cleaner. and what that involved was plugging the thing. It would only last for 30 seconds, but if you plugged it back in and held down the trigger as you did, it would reset the battery memory.
Right.
And now it's back to perfect again. So what I'm saying is, plug in your camera, hold down the trigger, with the extra long Hoover attachment on, and hope for the best.
or alternatively just hoover up the battery
or buy
and then go out and buy a new one. Yeah, and actually follow Will's advice. Well, there we go. Well, anyway, it's been an interesting time. Let's just leave it at that. It's probably the perfect segue after talking about batteries and cameras and what have you. It's the perfect segue into talking a little bit about some new product launches which we've seen in the last few weeks. Will has been busy on Zoom calls with various manufacturers, but there are two cameras that have kind of really stood out for us, which we thought we'd kind of delve a little deeper into. And that is Fujifilm's GFX100S and Sony's A1. Now, if you've got £5,500 in your back pocket, then you can buy the GFX100S. If you've got £6,500 in your back pocket, then you can buy the Sony A1. So let's talk about the Fujifilm first, because I guess the sort of headline news, if I'm right on this one, Will, is the fact that it's a relatively small, almost DSLR-sized camera, but with a really hefty resolution, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically using the same sensor and processor of the GFX100. So it's a 102 megapixel sensor camera using what Fujifilm calls large format and what I call medium format. And it is quite a light body. I mean, it's 900 grams. So it's 500 grams lighter than the GFX 100. And you've got a tremendously competitive price. Because £5,500 is, well, compared with the GFX 100, which is £9,999. So it's almost half the price for the same sensor for a lightweight camera. I mean, it sounds amazing. I mean, I haven't handled it, and I haven't seen it in the flesh yet. I'm looking forward to trying it because I'm a Fujifilm GFX user. I have a 50R, and I have 102 megapixels as opposed to 51 megapixels. Well, I don't need it, but what the hell? I love megapixels.
I don't need it. Hang on, let's just freeze that moment in time. I don't need it, but I'll have it.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think essentially that is, I mean, that's quite an interesting point, isn't it? So, I mean, the resolution is the right home thing about this, but I mean, I think you're a bit hasty to say you don't need it, Will, surely, because it's like the benefits of having a 100 megapixel sensor are, well, there's got to be many, apart from the fact you might need a bit more computer processing power when you come to actually edit them and a bit more storage.
Of course, it's not just the megapixels in terms of still photography. There's all the video features these cameras now feature too. So they shoot 4K with a medium format. You know, if you like using your bokeh and all the rest of it, then and you like the medium format look on movie as well as stills.
Do you not think though that it will give people a genuine sort of conundrum to consider, which is, DSLR size camera with that sort of resolution? I mean, obviously if you're looking at stuff like, the Canon range, the Nikon range, obviously they're lower price, but you don't have that sort of, a Z7 Mark II, for example. I'm not sure off the top of my head how much that costs, but that's 45 megapixels and a full frame sensor. This is 102 and a bigger sensor, and obviously the quality is just going to be surely that much better, right?
I think that, to me, that's the defining difference with this new camera, is that it combines not only the massive hike in resolution with the kind of the more sort of accessible handling, and yeah, I think you can ask that question. You can put up like the GFX 50S against a full frame camera with a similar resolution, and in fact, Sony's A7R4 has got greater resolution than the GFX 50S. But when you can make claims about the benefits of that larger format sensor, larger than full frame, but it's kind of making that jump to 100 megapixels is probably where you're going to get the real feeling of difference. And of course, it's also got this, like a lot of cameras do, it's got this multi-shot mode that can build you a 400 megapixel image.
The thing is, though, I mean, it's interesting, this full frame debate, which came up during the presentation. When you start adding on the lenses, all lenses are much bigger. I mean, again, for the GFX 50R I always have the 23mm. That's quite bulky. You know, the 120 macro, that's quite large. So although the bodies might be comparable to full frame, and fair play to Fujifilm for doing that, if you use any number of lenses, if you just use one lens, fine. But if you use several lenses, then it's not the same. I have to say, it's not the same. So, which is why I do run a full frame outfit and I run a medium format outfit.
So from your perspective then, Will, this is going to be something that you're going to have in addition to you know, either an APS-C or a full frame setup, rather than something where you're going to chuck in those cameras in order to finance the purchase in the first place.
Yeah, I'd run, because I'm a gear nut anyway. I do suffer from GAS, as they call it, gear addiction syndrome, and I like having cameras. And it's not that I don't use them. The 50R has seen plenty of use in the time I've had it. But I do go out sometimes specifically to use that as a medium format camera, as opposed to taking around as a casual 35mm full frame camera. So I think about it quite differently. So every camera for a different purpose, and I'm perfectly fine with them promoting it as a high resolution camera, and it looks phenomenal. And like I said, I can't wait to use it. But is it a full frame replacement? You know, that's what I'd query, and that's based purely on the fact of the lenses available to the thing and the sizes of the lenses available for the format. You know, larger format, you need bigger lenses.
Sure.
It's simple.
Sure. So maybe it's a perfect time to move on to talk about the Sony then. So I mean, some headline figures on this are pretty impressive. So it's a 50 megapixel camera. It will shoot 8K video at 30p or 4K at 120p. It'll do 30 frames per second at full frame with autofocus and auto exposure within that. It looks a real monster of a camera in terms of specification. But I mean, Kingsley, I think you were going to make the point that you feel that it's like, you know, are you going to need it all? Is that really what we're dealing with here? You've got an amazing slab of technology, but how much of it is actually going to be useful?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't think anyone reading those specifications could fail to be kind of, you know, to have their head blown back a bit by some of the figures in there, and the fact that it kind of like it improves upon the, you know, everyone was pretty comfortable with the idea that the A9 II was Sony's flagship camera, and then they kind of go, well, no, hang on, we're going to do something that's got like basically the best bits of every camera. It is incredible, but I don't think I genuinely think it would be overspecking for me. And you know, I am guilty of overspecking.
So you don't want 30 frames per second at 50 megapixels when you're photographing your dogs, is what you're saying?
Well, I don't know what I'd do with 29 of those frames. That's the thing, and like it's great, isn't it? So no, I mean, in theory, yes, brilliant. Because what you do is you'd fire away and you'd come back home and you'd pick the ones that you wanted. But I know that I wouldn't. I know that I would keep every frame of those 30 frames a second, and I'd store them, even the blurred ones probably, because I'd be thinking, oh well, you know what, if Will wants a comparison in the mag, you know, of a sort of something that's out of focus and in focus, well, maybe it'd be useful. And you know, I do think it's not for me. It's obviously for some people. I mean, you know, for people that need everything, and particularly people that are, you know, pros who are genuine hybrid shooters. You know, this is going to be like incredibly appealing, isn't it? The idea that it's got 8K video. Personally, I'm not that bothered about video specifications on a camera. Like nothing about the video specs of the Z7 II, which are, you know, pretty good. None of those actually made me buy the camera, just because it's not my scene. I mean, it's great to have the option, but and this sort of brings me to the idea, which is a slightly sort of tangential idea, but I'd love to see camera manufacturers saying, we haven't put any video on this, and you know, and you can save $1,000 if you like. You know, you can buy it without. It's like, you know, going and buying a car from a car dealer and saying, you know, well, I don't want the fancy, or like my cars, well, I don't want brakes or, you know, air conditioning.
Yeah.
Or, you know.
I don't want wheels that go in the right direction. Well, Will, you were obviously on the briefing with Sony. I mean, what was their raison d'etre behind the whole thing? What is it? Is it like a show of strength from Sony in terms of like, look at, we can do anything you lot can do, other camera manufacturers we can do better, or what's your take on that?
Well, first thing to say, Roger, was you talked about some of those figures being mentioned and how jaw-dropping they sounded, and indeed on the Zoom call I was on, there were fellow journalists from around the world. So there's a Zoom call with all these people on it, and as the guy from Sony walked through some of these specs, you could see people's faces and their jaws dropping all around the world when journalists were hearing you can shoot 30 frames per second, with full. This is full frame, 30 frames per second, compressed RAWs, and you've got 120 AF and auto exposure calculations every second, so you can track focus. It's got a world's first. It's a first electronic shutter with flash sync. I mean, we haven't had that before because you can't sync. Well, you normally can't sync it because of the tech in this camera. You can sync at 200th of a second. That's incredible, and the fact there's minimal distortion on this. With rolling shutter as well on the electronic shutter, so I haven't seen this thing yet. I've seen a few YouTube videos and it does look very, very impressive. But Sony did make a big thing about their 5 camera families, where they've got the resolution models, they've got the compact model, they've got the basic models, and they got the speed models. And this kind of actually day one straddles all 5, I think, because it's quite compact. It's 50 megapixels. And it's blazingly fast.
I was going to ask about that electronic shutter flash sync thing, because that's something that stood out to me on the specs. And I think the reason it stood out to me is because I didn't really get why it was such a big deal. So, I mean, this could be down to my sort of shortfall technically, but can you explain to me, and presumably other people who are listening and thinking, well, that's a bit of a head scratcher, why is it such a big deal?
Well, I'm not a shutter designer, Rod, so I don't know the ins and outs. But as I understand it, with electronic shutters traditionally, is that they scan very, very quickly. So that's why you sometimes get this rolling shutter effect with a moving subject. So you do get this distortion, or if you accidentally move the camera during a long exposure even a normal speed exposure with the electronic shutter, you get distortion because the camera's scanning. Now, obviously, what this shutter must do is scan so quickly that it allows for a shutter speed of 200th of a second as a flash sync speed.
Right.
So when this flash it's firing in this very brief time of flash fires, and as you know, it's very, very brief, this scan must complete the whole format in one go.
And again, forgive my ignorance on this, but I always thought that an electronic shutter was something that you used when you wanted to be quiet and sort of unnoticeable. So why would you want to be firing a flash when you want to be quiet and unnoticeable?
I suppose, Roger, just gives you the option that you can use your electronic shutter, and you can. I mean, for instance, with a mechanical shutter, of course, you can, over a period of time, waste a lot of actuations. As an example, I've just done 1,000 odd actuations of my Z7 shutter on bubbles because I've had to light it with flash.
Right.
Now, I could have saved wear and tear on that camera by having an electronic shutter with flash, but I can't right now. But if I had the Sony, I could. So there is that. And you're right about the 7s with flash, but I think the opportunity of using it, the save power, is a good one, and have no distortion. And they've also got this anti-flicker mechanism in there. So again, if you use electronic shutter under fluorescent lighting, for example, you can get bands of tone across the picture. But now there's an anti-flicker technology too. It's done some amazing things.
I think, like in terms of other witchcraft that it appears to present, like it's sort of claiming to improve upon the A9's EVF in terms of, now, if people don't know, the A9 and the A9 II are the only cameras I've ever used, mirrorless cameras that don't have some sort of lag when you shoot high speed. And I borrowed an A9 and I used it for a bit, and to be honest, I didn't particularly like the viewfinder. I didn't think the viewfinder it didn't seem to me to be that clear or enjoyable to use. But the benefit of that stacked sensor is the stacked sensor architecture that gives you like a dual readout, and it means that you can get this uninterrupted view. I mean, that would be like, that's one of the things that made me think about getting a Sony. Like, but I didn't really want an A9. I wanted like an A7R4 with that sort of EVF technology, which I guess now exists because this thing is 50 megapixel and does all these other things as well. But like, I mean, and you know, continuing the witchcraft theme, that the AF on it, anyone who's used one of Sony's cameras will know that they basically do have the best currently, seemingly to me, the best AF, this real-time tracking AF, which is just sort of, you know, incredibly tenacious and locks onto all sorts of things. And they've, Will, forgive me if I'm wrong, is this, so the presentation stuff that I saw said that they've added, as well as human and animal, they've added bird.
Yeah.
All three of those things are animals, not like, you know, birds are animals are animals, presumably they mean mammals, or, you know, I don't know. And humans obviously are also animals. So sort out your naming of your AF system, Sony. Spend a bit of dev money on that.
I think the bird one's interesting because, of course, birds come in many sizes and shapes. So I wonder how it's going to do with, I don't know, the little LBJs in my back garden at the moment, the little sparrows and stuff, whether they can focus lock on their eyes as opposed to I don't know, an eagle or a swan or I don't know, something bigger.
Well,
interesting.
We will have to wait and see. And of course, I suppose to round this little section off, the $64 million, or should I say £6,500 question, is which, Kingsley, of the two cameras, had you got the money and the inclination, which one would you buy?
Well, I was going to say just now, it's the typical thing, isn't it, that I'd kind of plumped for this new Nikon, and I am happy with it. But this typical thing that whenever you do that, something else new comes out and your heart sinks a little bit, and then you do a bit of reading and you try and work out whether you made a mistake or not. I don't think I have made a mistake for various reasons. Based on which of those cameras I would choose, if I had to choose one, I'd probably go for the GFX, because I think it would give me something different, something a bit, you know, although, you know, clearly the A1 is an incredible piece of technology, it's not going to give you anything visually different from another full frame camera. And one of the kind of points I wanted to make was that with the way that technology works out, technology trickles down into other models. And so, you know, developments in AF and stuff like that, if you pick up an A6400, that's got wicked fast AF, real-time AF. And, you know, and I remember reviewing that and thinking, bloody hell, this is really good for a camera of this kind of this level. But something that doesn't trickle down is, you know, sensor size. That's a completely different ballgame. So if given the choice, I would go for the medium format, simply because it would give me something different and new.
So
one vote for the Fujifilm. Will?
Well, Rog, the thing is, I've already declared my colours because I already own a GFX system. So it would make perfect sense for me to go for the GFX100S. That said, I could take the contrary route because I've got the 50R already. So why do I need another body? Maybe I should go for something which can shoot at 30 frames per second and 50 megapixel. I don't have any Sony lenses, but, you know, what the hell? Maybe I take up sports photography and suddenly the Sony would be a perfect fit. But I suppose, thinking about it, yeah, the GFX100S would be an obvious purchase for me. It sounds amazing, but they both sound amazing. But I do more of that sort of photography as opposed to action photography. So
Yeah.
Why don't I need all that tech?
Well, and I think just to complete a full house from a Fujifilm perspective, I would also go for the GFX, largely because I mean not that I actually have £5,500 to spend on a camera, but largely because it's about the photography you do, isn't it? And it's not about like walking into the virtual pub or the virtual camera club at the moment and saying, well, I've got a camera that does, you know, 50 megapixel frames at 30 frames a second. It's about what camera is going to enhance the type of photography you do right now. And for me, And I think obviously for you guys as well, that's the GFX. So we'll get 3 on order. I'm sure Fujifilm will be delighted with our business. So well, thanks very much, chaps. That's a really good chat about the new cameras, the new tech. Obviously, if you dear listeners have some views or would like to disagree with what we've had to say, we would love to hear from you. The best way to get in touch with us is through our email address, which is podcast@photographynews.co.uk, or you can also contact us on the various social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and the handle for all those is @PhotoNewsPM. So some people who have used those methods to get in touch with us have sent us some questions, which we shall move on to answer. And Will, I'm going to come to you for the first one. This sounds right up your street. It comes from Lee on email, and she says, because it's Lee, I'm presuming it's a she, Lee spelled Leigh. Apologies if it's not a female Lee. She says, can I get the team's view on monitor and printer calibration, please? I've heard it's worthwhile, but I can't see what the fuss is all about. Will, you're a bit of a fan of the calibration, are you not?
I'm a fan of the calibration, but I'm not into the science of it. I'm not an IT geek. All I know is Roger and Lee and anybody else interested is that I know that I calibrate my monitor. And so when I make a print on my Epson, the color of the print looks like what I've got on the screen. And that I understand is how calibration works, and that's why it's important. So if you want results that look correct on your monitor and then you upload it to somebody else's computer or you make a print, if your monitor is color managed, then that's a flying start. And I do know one thing. I have an X-Rite i1 Studio gadget, and that's really very good. And then one thing I do know is, for instance, when I make prints, often what I do is start by downloading the generic profile from Permajet, Hallenmuller, whoever it might be, for the paper and the printer that I have. And I'll make a print using what they supply as generic profiles. I look at it, I think that's fine, not bad, nothing wrong with that at all. Then what I'll do is I'll get the i1 Studio out and make my own custom profile. It takes a couple of prints, a half hour in time or so. It's not too difficult. You basically make the print and then use this gadget to read the color patches that are produced by the printer. And then when I make my own custom profile and print exactly the same file as I did with the generic profile, and then look at them both side by side, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the custom profile picture is superior to the generic profile print. So although I'm not into the science of it, all I do know is when you do calibrate your monitor and your printer, if you print, that there is a benefit. There is a difference, without doubt.
So what, so going back to Lee's original question, like, well, I suppose we could assume that kind of if he or she is saying, what's all the fuss about? Maybe they're already enjoying some level of calibration and they're getting prints that look like what they're seeing on their screen. And therefore, I mean, how do you go about, how do you know when it's off, Will? Like, what sort of stuff do you see that?
Well, certainly in terms of, because I do an awful lot of printing, I know when the calibration's off, when literally the colors are all wrong and they're tangibly wrong. I have some set pictures I use to test papers in Photography News. And so I kind of know what this looks like. It's been printed hundreds of times, even by labs as well. So I kind of know what it looks like. And if something comes out wrong, I can see that, so for instance, the highlights might be cyan or magenta. So it's quite clear if the colors just don't look like what they do on screen. So I've got a warning, and most of these gadgets have this warning you can do on the software, like every month or 2 months, wherever you set. It warns you to calibrate your monitor because it drifts off. The things about it, of course, when you're looking at your screen, it might look perfectly fine. But I make the print and I go, oh, that's off. Then I calibrate my monitor and then it's back right again. I mean, it is a bit of a dark art. And I've been to exhibitions, but I've talked to the color management people who are just blind with science. And they say you do this and do that, do the others. And I just invested in a spider, a data color spider, some while ago. I think it's about £80 at the time. And I thought I made a difference, and I've believed it ever since. Now, if Lee is not quite sure about the fuss, then you can buy these gadgets for not a huge amount of money, really, not compared with the gear we've just been talking about. And I think you will see a benefit. But I can't go into the dark art. I just know that what I see on screen when I make a print, they look more or less the same. I say more or less the same. There's always going to be some density difference, but certainly in terms of colour, I'm very happy with what I produce. And it takes a little bit of effort and it costs a few quid, but it's worth it, because otherwise you end up tearing your hair out.
What about getting it right before you take the picture? Because obviously there are devices, aren't there, that you can drop into like a still life setup or a color chart or something like that. Do you ever go to that level of I'm going to say pedantry, but probably that's not the right word. Do you ever do that, Kingsley?
I actually have I know a guy called Will Chung, and he once gave me a now hang on, let's see, I can't remember the brand of it, but it's a white balance filter, and you put it over your lens, and when you're in tricky lighting, you manually calibrate the white balance based on that. And situations where I found that useful is stuff like shooting in woodland, where you get a lot of like weird green light and stuff, and it kind of helps. So I would say in some situations, yes. And, in studio photography, where stuff like getting very coherent color and tone is important, then those are situations where they can be really useful as well.
Okay.
Yeah, Roger, I've seen people use them. I've seen people like wedding photographers use gadgets like the, I think it's the X-Rite color checker passport, which is a little color test chart, and they get the bride to hold it. Again, underneath, if they're under green shade, for instance, of a leafy bough, and then they make sure they get the dress right in processing. It's worthwhile, but if you're doing critical professional work, then it's definitely worth it. For enthusiasts, nah, not for me.
Well, look what you've done, Lee. You've basically opened up a nest of vipers in that conversation. Really. You asked what seemingly on the face of it was a very simple question, and well, I hope you've got an answer out of it. I think if I sort of distill it down, I think what we've basically said is, yeah, you should calibrate your monitor, and then if you're using a printer at home, you should use a profile, be it the profile supplied by the printer paper manufacturer, or actually customize it yourself. So seems like a good idea, I think, Lee, in answer to your question. So moving on from that slightly contentious question, this one I don't think will raise any problems whatsoever, he says with a degree of irony in his voice. I'm a keen landscape photographer, says Beatrice on email, and she says, but I don't own any filters. Cue intake of breath. Does that make me a bad person? And if I wanted to rectify this, which would be the first filter you would buy, Kingsley Singleton?
Well, I'm sorry, Beatrice, we've run out of time. We spoke about Lee's question.
Don't worry, there'll be some studious editing and we'll be fine.
Well, I think my first sort of reaction to that would be sort of, again, in a way, like if you're happy with what you're getting, then no, maybe you don't need filters. What I would say is you're probably missing out on some things if you don't have what you would call sort of the core landscape filtration services that you can pick up from your friendly filter supplier. And the main one for me would be investing in a neutral density filter, or in fact a set of them, so you can control your shutter speed a bit more easily.
And are we talking ND grads, or are we talking ND solids?
The jury, I mean, solid NDs, because that's something you can't replicate in software. You can put digital grads on, assuming your exposure isn't so far off that it's beyond the sort of processing capability of the computer. If you're working in RAW and you use a graduated filter, you can bring the sky down. It's absolutely fine. But if the sky is 4 or 5 stops brighter than the landscape, then you might start having a bit of a problem, because there might not be enough latitude. So in those situations, yeah, like a physical ND grad can be very useful. But a full ND, which helps you control shutter speed, is literally something that you can't do in software, isn't it? If you want flowing water, you need an ND. And it's a similar thing with polarizers, insofar as if you want to get rid of some reflections on surfaces of water or something, then once again, you literally can't do that. So those are the two landscape filters that you kind of can't do without.
But nailing your colours to the mast, and bear in mind that Beatrice actually only said one, you're going for ND grad, right?
Well, I would go for I'd go for a full ND.
Right.
Whether it's a square filter or a sort of a screw-on one. But I'd also kind of say that, like, actually using filters is quite fun. It's quite a pleasurable thing as part of photography, and if you get along fine without them, then that's absolutely fine. But borrow a set, and you kind of, in a way, you can feel a bit more sort of connected to what you're doing, I think.
Will, anything to add?
Yeah, well, for me, just one thing to say is that to Beatrice is one filter I suggest she gets anyway is a skylight or a digital protection filter. And for you, Kingsley, you need one because she's got a new lens, only because they offer a physical protection to your lens. Now, assuming we're not talking about skylights or digital protection filters, but the one filter I would say she needs is a polarizer. Again, it's an effect that you can't truly replicate in software. Although I've seen some people do say they do have that function, but I've never seen it done properly. But for landscapes, if you just want to take the gloss off the foliage, and also things like rocks and enhance blue skies, I think, and also kill reflections on water, I think a polarizer is definitely one I would suggest. I would suggest it before the ND that Kingsley mentioned, because not everybody likes blurred water.
I'm absolutely with you, Will, if only to help contradict what Kingsley said. So, I mean, just to elaborate on that, what I was going to say, Beatrice, is that I've had two kind of wow moments with filters, and I don't use filters all that often, but the two sort of wow moments I had in terms of my photographic lifetime was, first of all, when I bought a polarizer, and it was like, whoa, you can reduce reflections, you can get some real spectacular skies and just saturation of colors. And the second time was when I first used a 10 stopper ND filter, which, I mean, it's the ultimate. It's not just blurring water, it's blurring skies, it's blurring clouds and blurring seas and stuff like that. It really does open up a whole new world of photography, really. So I guess I'm with Will in terms of, like, definitely polarizer to start with, and then I would probably lurch into an ND 10 stopper, something like that, to sort of give you more creative options, really, when it comes to your photography. So hopefully that answers your question, Beatrice. No doubt people will write in and say what idiots we are and how you should all use a warm up or a cool down filter before,
or a star filter, like
star filter.
The star glow thing.
Other filter hits. What's the most embarrassing filter you've got in your bag, Kingsley? You've got a Coke in rainbow filter in your bag.
I had for a time, I had a screw-on filter, but which was also a grad, and I could never see the point of those.
But presumably the front element rotate, wasn't it like a polarizer where you actually could rotate the front bit, or not?
Yeah, but you couldn't sort of move it up and down like you would with a square filter. So you were kind of limited in terms of where your sort of graduation started.
I think they were the first filters that Monsieur Coquin came out with. I think going back to the late 70s, early 80s. They were grads, but they were in a round mount, so you could move them around, but you say you couldn't adjust the height. Right. But then, of course, that was all solved when the Coquin system came out.
Right.
Happy days.
And who could forget? I mean, presumably, Will, I've got you down as a kind of a Coquin keyhole mask filter kind of guy.
Oh, well, no, I was tobacco magenta skies. Oh, emerald. Emerald was a good colour as well. Had some hideous colour skies. You won't catch me doing that now much.
Marvellous. Well, there we go. Hopefully we've got some answers to your questions there. If you do have a question for us, please do send it to podcast@photographynews.co.uk. I think we're just about done. However, we would never finish a Photography News podcast without a Will's word of wisdom. So, Will, what have you got this time?
Well, for me, Rog, it's a simple one, and it is just to say to our listeners, keep your lens clean. Now, that sounds really simple and obvious, but the fact is, and I've been guilty of it in the past, is that if, as photographers, we often change lenses, dust and stuff can actually get into the real element of your lens as well. And indeed, on one occasion, I was taking some pictures and everything was coming out really smudgy and romantic and soft focusing. I couldn't work out why. I looked down at the lens and I thought, well, that's clean. The filter was clean. Everything was clean. Then, of course, it twigged that actually there's my thumbprint on the rear element of the lens. I know that's rather amateurish, but that was actually what happened. So keep your lens clean, not just the front, not just the filters, but also the rear element too. That's my tip.
I can add to that. I've done exactly the same thing. I was walking around Tokyo with like a pancake. It was a Olympus little pancake lens thing, and I was getting the same. It was after dark, and I was getting the same sort of dreamy effect. And I was thinking, like, oh, is this what's going on? And took it off, and there was this bloody great thumbprint on the back of it. Yeah, it's not uncommon.
Indeed. So just a little wipe with a lens cloth, I take it, Will, is all that is required?
Yeah, I mean, I wear specs, so I've always got a lens cleaning cloth, and I've got some of these little cleaners you get in little packets you get from the opticians as well. So yeah, something like that is fine.
Oh, and Kingsley is now waving a bottle of something in front of the screen. Again, great for podcast recording. What's it called, Kingsley?
Well, I've got a bottle of Lee Clear filter wash here, which is, I mean, I think if one were to kind of deconstruct the ingredients, it's like, what is it, sort of isopropyl alcohol and a bit of detergent and water. I think I know there are lots of people that make their own, aren't they? They make their own.
I was going to say, it sounds like the start of a great cocktail.
Yeah. Let's get on it.
Well, on that note, we shall finish. We've managed to get through without the courier turning up at Will's house, which is a bit of a win. So presumably there is a courier who's currently writing out some eBay listings for a couple of Canon lenses.
I'm slightly worried there. I better get on them.
Yeah. But thanks very much for your time, Will. Much appreciated.
It's been a pleasure. Stay warm, guys.
We will try, and it certainly looks like Kingsley's doing that. He's got about 7 jumpers on. So thanks also to Mr. Kingsley Singleton. Thank you, Kingsley.
A great pleasure, as always.
We will see you again in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks very much. Bye.